Welcome back to another episode of Harmonious at Lunch, the show that fuels your business success. I'm Brandon Gano, your host and guide through the world of harmonious business growth. Today, we're unlocking powerful strategies with industry experts to help your business thrive. If you're a business owner, entrepreneur, or executive, you are in the right place. Join me and our incredible guest today on the journey to clarity, growth, and success. It is time to revolutionize your approach to business. Let's dive in with another episode of Harmonious at Lunch. Welcome back in. We got some more bite-sized business advice for you today, and we have a very special guest, one of my favorite types of people. He is the champion of the unnoticed entrepreneur. I love a good underdog story, and I just feel like that's what a lot of small businesses and entrepreneurs are. We're that underdog, right? We're the unnoticed entrepreneur. Jim James, an author, speaker, consultant, coach, business expert, all of the above, but more importantly, the champion of unnoticed entrepreneurs. Jim, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Brandon, thank you so much for inviting me, and thanks for the intro. Very generous of you.
Of course. No, I'm excited to have this conversation. I was excited for the conversation, and then you told me you're the champion of the unnoticed entrepreneur, and I got even more excited. I love this stuff. I love helping the underdog win. It sounds like you do the same thing. So give me a little bit of a background. Tell me, what is the unnoticed entrepreneur and how did it come to be?
So Brandon, I had my legs dangling out of this plane, this little one-engined airplane going over a field in Kent. And it was like a chilly spring morning. And I had a choice really. And I was afraid of heights, to be honest, but I had a big cable on my back and I jumped out of the plane. And in the 1 minute, 48 seconds that it takes you to drop from 2,000 feet to ground. And by the way, you can't stop. You do realize that's what gravity is about. I mean, once you're falling, you're going to get to the bottom. You're going to get to the ground. And I realized in that 1 minute, 48 seconds that I could make more money creating something from nothing and making publicity from that event and activity than I could working by the hour. I was selling toys at £3.80 an hour, going back a long way now, but as a teenager, and I needed to get to Australia for Operation Rally for an expedition. But if I kept on selling toys, I was going to run out of time. I would never make enough money quickly enough to take this trip of a lifetime. So I did a parachute jump, got it sponsored, and raised enough money to go on that expedition. And I was 17 at the time. And it just really connected me to the possibilities of creating something from nothing and using publicity for profits, Brandon. So I've built businesses ever since, some a little less nerve-wracking, frankly, than jumping out of an airplane, I have to tell you. I went to Singapore at the age of 27 to start my first company, East West Public Relations. And then I went to Beijing in 2006 to start the offices of the agency. And I opened again in India for the company. But then I started to import Morgan sports cars to China and started the British Motorsport Festival and the British Business Awards for the Chamber of Commerce. And then in 2019, came back to the UK, to the West Country, to Wiltshire, to bring my two amazing Chinglish daughters back to school with their Shanghainese wife. Or my Shanghainese wife, I should say, not their wife, my Shanghainese wife and our two daughters. So now, after nearly 30 years as an expatriate entrepreneur, my feet are firmly on the ground here in England.
I love it. It's quite the story. And it's one of those moments too, when you talk about, you realize you can make more money in just a short period of time. I think we all have that realization at some point where it's like you're working a job and you want to buy something, right? And let's say you want to buy a car and you're like, okay, at my current wage, this car is going to cost me 7,462 hours of working.
Yeah,
and you're like,
exactly.
there has to be a better way.
Yeah, working for someone else is a trade-off, right? I mean, they give you security and you give them your time. And that's great. And I don't knock people that prefer the other side of the trade, because frankly, without those people, entrepreneurs would never find any employees. But For me, having grown up in Africa and America, where I went to junior high and also university, I'd seen kind of too much of the world, and there was too much adventure to be had. Earning by the hour was never going to get me enough, enough money with the amount of things that I wanted to do. So living with risk, Brandon, as you know, as an entrepreneur, is part of that trade-off, right? You surrender security for some risk, but then on the other hand, you take responsibility, so you never have the risk that someone else is in control of your destiny. And that's kind of a big growing up moment, right? As an entrepreneur, you have to recognize that no one's going to come and save you. You have to take the decisions. You have to pay yourself quite often last, because you believe in what you're doing, and you have to fund quite often through the months where the money's not coming in. But you believe always that it's greater to have that independence and that control over your own destiny, and moreover, to create things, which is the joy really for me of entrepreneurship, is to create something from nothing. And, to be able to leave something or someone or somewhere better than you found it, that's a real motivator as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, you're speaking to the right audience. No convincing needed here. It is very much like that jump out of the airplane moment where you just have to hope you folded your parachute the right way. But today's conversation is really about branding, about personal branding, company branding, and how to leverage those for your business success and growth. So let's start to unpack this conversation a little bit, and then we could dive into a unique method that won't surprise anybody listening to this show, about how to actually go about doing that personal brand. So let's separate the two. How do you define them, just for clarity, between a personal brand and a company brand?
This is such an important point, Brandon, now for entrepreneurs, because often the entrepreneur out outgrows the pace of growth of the business, and yet they need to stay in touch and be part of that company. So it's really, really important, I think, that entrepreneurs have a separate but equal brand to the companies that they start. Anyone that's looking at exiting the business will already be thinking about how they are selling the company and the brand without necessarily having to do a long exit for the business. So really the definition, I think, is that a personal brand is what you stand for, what motivates you as an individual, as an entrepreneur. And the company brand is what service, what solution that company provides. So the entrepreneur's emotional motivation is important, and that enthusiasm and energy gets employees, partners, and customers involved. But customers want a result for themselves, right? They want a solution. They want either a software, or they want a hardware, or a drink, right? And they don't consume the entrepreneur, they consume the product or the service that the company delivers to them. And that's why you can have what we call constructive distancing. You can have a separate but equal brand between you, the entrepreneur, and the company.
Okay, so you said something interesting that I want to unpack a little bit, because I've seen this happen. I did not put the pieces together until you said it. You said the entrepreneur often outgrows the company brand, and I've seen that happen to the point where actually the company dies because the entrepreneur is now just a different point, and they have no real passion for this brand, product, solution, whatever that thing was in the first place. So what are some mistakes people make when they're going down this path in order to result in a situation like that?
The danger, of course, Brandon, is that the entrepreneur tries to separate from the company without the structure. Okay. So what we need to do is we need to help the entrepreneur to build their own personal brand. And that can be a name, can be a logo for their name, could be a color set, for example, and what maybe an industry or a mission that they want to focus on. I had one entrepreneur on my show, and he's really into machine learning. Pradeep Joshi, his name is. He's into machine learning, and he's been doing it since university, and he's created multiple businesses, and machine learning has been a part of those, but he's retained writing books, doing podcasts, speaking at universities around machine learning. And then he has the company that is defined by the problem that the company solves. Okay. So it's around, in his case, helping in construction industries, how to use machine learning. But you can already see, can't you, that Pradeep understands how machine learning can impact multiple industries, multiple workflow situations. But he's taken one with a specific partner and made that into one particular industry vertical and applied that knowledge. So what needs to happen is that the company needs to also have a very clear definition of what it's doing. And whilst the founder is intrinsically involved, they're almost like a parent. You know, I'm a dad, right? And I always say to my children, to my daughters, my role is to prepare them for when they're ready not to need me anymore. Because if I have children who are dependent on me, it's not good for me as a person. It's not good for the children either, actually, right? The children at some stage need to generate their own independence, their own sustainability. They need to know how to go out on their own in the world and create their own opportunities. So the company then has its own brand. And what happens in successful companies is the founder recognizes at what stage they need to let go of certain functions, Brandon. So you might find the function of visionary lies maybe with the founder, but then there may be, for example, often someone in sales or in operations, which I know you're involved with, or in marketing or in production. And then when a company gets to a certain level, and it depends on different entrepreneurs, they then hire a professional CEO, because the business then becomes less like a speedboat and more like a large ship. It needs more procedures, it needs more processes, it needs more people who are in alignment. The pace of change of the business slows down, and often the entrepreneur in their DNA has a pace, has an energy to keep moving forward. So that's why it's so important. So the entrepreneur needs to retain, if you like, what their core focus and mission is. Like Pradeep's is machine learning, and the company has its solutions. And over time, what Pradeep did was he employed people to replace himself in those functional areas. So I hope that makes some sense. There is if you like, an architecture, a process to doing that. But I think also just to recognize, saying as a dad, for example, or a founder, that there comes a time when the business is not going to need me or when I shouldn't be relevant, is not a rejection of the original business. It's not a rejection of the people in the company. It's very important to say that, because some people say, "Oh, but you're not loyal to the company anymore." It's not about that. As an entrepreneur, in the Richard Gerber E-Myth concept, an entrepreneur by definition finds opportunities and builds businesses that sustain those opportunities. And that's part of what we do, right? There comes a time when there's someone who's a better guardian, someone who's better at running that business. So we have to recognize that it's not about not caring anymore. It's about playing a different role in that company. So I hope that kind of gives maybe some more definition. Brandon, is there anything in there that wasn't clear? Because I'm mindful
No,
maybe.
it lines up exactly with what we see with our clients too. And you mentioned we specialize in operations. We actually do install a business architecture in our clients' companies, because our goal, and we say this to people when we first meet them, is to go from CEO to chairman of the board. Because it's very rare to have somebody who has that startup mentality, who has the ability to get the business from nothing to seven figures, for them to then transition to a true CEO role, because it's opposite of what an entrepreneur by definition is. And it's very, very complex to make that transition. If you do it wrong, the business and the people in the business obviously suffer. So I think you explained it perfectly. But from the branding perspective, that's where I see it fall apart with not only our clients, but other people in general. Because like you said, like your friend there, your client, he loves machine learning and he wants to go talk about it and just do everything machine learning. But the business is, if it's seen the wrong way, is holding him back from his passion. And that's, I think, where people get really in trouble.
Yeah, and also, Brandon, let's be clear that we're taking Pradeep's example. He knows so much about machine learning, but the clients don't need the full extent of his learning about machine learning, right? They don't need all of his knowledge. They need a part of it which applies to a specific business problem. So the secret is to take that part of his knowledge, put that into the business that solves a business problem. And as we know, a business is part solution and a lot process. And then it's scale, and it's about removing friction, and it's about marketing. Another great example is Brad Sugars, who's the founder of Action Coach. And he started Action Coach 30 years ago. They have over 1,000 franchisees, business coaches around the world. And now Brad Sugars has bradsugars.com. So he has his own website where he has now his own Big Success podcast. He kindly had me as a guest on that, and he's been on my show, and he's written the foreword, in fact, for my upcoming volume 3 of the Unnoticed Entrepreneur book. But there's a classic example of someone who has a passion for learning and for growing things. In Brad Sugars, is wants to keep forging ahead with new ideas. But actually, the 1,000 coaches and their clients need to follow the methodologies that he's built. They don't need more fresh ideas. They need to implement the ideas he's already brought forward. So the danger can be the entrepreneur stays around and says, hey, I'm bored, I'm going to introduce new ideas. And the rest of the organization, and importantly, the clients, are overwhelmed because actually they don't need this torrent of new ideas. They need the idea that solves the business problem, and then they need to integrate that into the rest of their businesses.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. So you have a completely shocking and groundbreaking way for you to promote your own personal brand that's going to the audience is going to fall off their chair, I'm sure. But one thing I want to note is I think this is actually a really good way to stay in tune with your business in that sort of transition period, because you can go out there and start to build your personal brand and talk about all those things and sustain your business and not kill it and not feel like it's holding you back at the same time. So, Jim, let me ask you this question. I mean, I don't even know if I'm ready for the answer. What's your favorite way to build your personal brand?
I'm going to have to take a really long, hard think about this, Brad. What could I possibly think about? I've driven a Morgan sports car into the Forbidden City to do a bit of a stunt. I've jumped out of an airplane. I've done some stunts in my past, Brandon. But the most consistent, controllable, and actually most economical way to build a personal brand now really is podcasting. But you might be surprised that I said podcasting. We both have shows, and I've now had my show for about 3.5 years and 800 plus episodes. It's in the top 2.5% worldwide of podcasts. And I say that not because I'm trying to brag, but just because as an individual, it's possible to create an amazing amount of content and relationships with people at low cost with a microphone, right? But here's where I think that the surprise might come for your audience there is, I don't think everyone should be a host. Brandon, I know you're a brilliant host. I have a lot of lessons that I still need to learn about being a good host. But one of the mistakes I think that many people have made, or have been sold, really, I should say, is that they need to be the host. And my argument is that most people should not be a host, in the same way that most people shouldn't be publishers. Most people should not be broadcasters, which is essentially what we are. And in the old days, we used to write newsletters, company newsletters, but companies couldn't keep up. So what you really, I think, are finding is that more and more people that started podcasts are leaving that, unless they had it within the DNA to be connectors and conversationalists. But the real opportunity for podcasts and entrepreneurs is to be guests. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is, frankly, it's a lot less work, but also you want to access the community and the connections of your host, right? If you build a podcast, you and I both know it's hard to build an audience, right? And if you already have a company and you have a community, you can publish your podcast. They've probably already heard from you, right? So you're sending them, you're just sending them in a new format, maybe the old ideas, maybe some new ideas. But the secret with podcasting is you can connect to other people's networks. And, the old tipping point, the Malcolm Gladwell, we have mavens and we have connectors and we have salespeople. As a CEO, you want to be going to another person's network, another maven, right? You're a maven. You've collected people together, right? So the CEO goes and drops into your network. They meet all of your connections, and that's fresh. So my view is that people can look at podcasts because as a guest, you're getting to new networks, but also from an SEO point of view, Brandon, if someone is on your show and you post about them on Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, everywhere, and on your website, they're going to get backlinks, right? And so you're doing work to promote your show that promotes the guest as well. And it's in that sense very, very efficient. And the third part is you get great content. And the whole point about earned media is the credibility of having someone else be interested in what you do, right? And as well as I do, and it's heartbreaking, but most small companies, most SMEs are not newsworthy unless something particularly goes wrong or they raise a particular amount of money. Most media are interested in companies that will reach at least half of their readership. I ran a PR firm for 25 years. So if you don't have a story that's going to reach at least half of their audience, they won't want to do it because they won't get enough advertising revenue for the time it takes to collect your story. That's the harsh reality of it. Podcasts are really narrowcasts, right? You can talk to someone who maybe has 1,000 listeners or 2,000 listeners. So it's very accessible regardless of the size of your business. If you go into a vertical, and you can find podcasts. So for those three reasons, one is you're meeting someone else's network, two, you're getting great backlinks, and three, you're going to get great content.
Yeah, yes, I obviously host a podcast. Me and my business partner, though, we are firm believers in everything you just said. We go on other people's podcasts. We try to get on 2 a week each. So we've seen it's just so powerful to both build that personal brand, direct people back to your company, which is obviously the bonus. And your second point there was interesting. I didn't put that piece together for a long time. I had a guest on this show a couple of weeks ago at this point, and they said when they first bought their domain for their brand, it was a very similar and more powerful domain was owned by somebody else, a competitor in the marketplace. So what they did was they got on podcasts and shows and they did speaking engagements, and they were able to control the narrative. So when anybody searched for a term relative to what their company did, because of the podcast and speaking, they owned Google. And it cost them no money. And I was like, wow, I didn't even consider that's how powerful something could be. You could own the narrative around your space just because of a podcast. It's wild.
Yeah, Brandon, it's amazing. I had a chap called Brendan Leibowitz. He came on my show and he has a company called SEO Optimizers. And I said, great, Brendan, what do you want to talk about? He said, honestly, I don't really mind. And I said, well, you applied to come on my show. He said, I'm only here for the backlinks. And look, we had a great conversation, and he's a smart guy, but it was a throwaway line for him. But actually, it's a really, really powerful point. You get the backlinks, and on the grounds that that's how Google works, you want to be thinking about that. So branding, I've worked on all manner of campaigns with traditional media, bought media, and so on. But for companies in the 6-figure to 7-figure range, where they're starting to go outbound, but also need the inbound marketing, podcasting is great.
Yeah, I love it. And the one thing that, we've had our fair share of, and I'm sure you have too, is the guest that's maybe just not quite prepared to be a podcast guest. I'll say that as nicely as possible. So Jim, I am a firm believer in this strategy for both marketing, personal branding, company branding, but there's some ways to do it right, and there's some very clear ways to do it wrong. You have, I believe, a gift for the audience about at least a start to that journey. So tell me a little bit about that, and I'll put your website on the screen here too.
Yeah, Brandon. So I've built a course called the Golden Podcast Guest Blueprint, and it's going to be available by the time people listen to this. In fact, it's already up, and now we've got some first testers going through it. And basically, the people that come to jimajames.com, they can get a free download, which is just part of the course, which is thinking about the personal branding aspects of being on a podcast in terms of what you wear and the considerations for being consistent around the need for solid colors, avoiding the moire effect, and so on. So this is a guide that I'd happily share with the people listening today, jimajames.com, and you'll be able to see a free download. And if they come for that, they'll also give a coupon for 50% off the course, the Golden Podcast Guest Blueprint. And that's 12 modules. In fact, it's quite a big course because I take people through everything from preparing the brand kit to having an offer, as we're just doing now, something for people to be able to take away in order to generate leads, but also interview techniques, which include having your story ready to be told in less than a minute, for example, and helping people to prepare the camera and the microphone and the lights. Your setup, you've got a wonderful neon sign at the back of you. We can see you and so on. But it's amazing how many people take the effort, and some people are paying, as you know, good money to booking agencies to get on podcasts. And then they're using the internal microphone from the computer, or they have the camera that's too low. So they're looking down at or up to the side, any direction. The way I look at it, Brandon, is that if the guest doesn't look good, the host doesn't look good, right? So if someone comes to my show and doesn't look and sound the part, I can't use the interview. It's a waste of everybody's time. So I built this course so that people can learn how to have a good performance, because ultimately podcasts are moving from conversations into performances. And the reason for that, Brandon, is because people like you and I, we need listeners, we need viewers. And if we don't increase the quality of our show, we're not going to increase the listeners and the viewers. My podcast is now monetized on YouTube, for example, right? So you could start as a podcaster to have a commercial benefit. Otherwise, eventually people will fade. So if there's a takeaway from today's conversation as well, is I really hope that listeners understand that if they're going to be on a podcast, they need to treat it like a performance, not just a conversation, because how they turn up for you or for me makes a difference to how they appear to other people, but also makes a direct impact on the success of our show. And that's why I've created this Golden Podcast Guest Blueprint course, really to guide people, because Brandon, when I had my PR agency, a big company, AT&T, Philips, Nortel, they pay consultants like me to media train the CEOs. But people aren't doing that for entrepreneurs, right? So there's no shame in it. It's not available. So with my background in the PR business and the podcast hosting of over 700 guests now, I was like, hey, I need to help and be a champion of the unnoticed entrepreneur, is to help them be ready so that when they go on the mic and on the camera, they look the best and people want to do business with them.
Yeah, it's so powerful. It's much needed. So thank you for that, first of all. But you don't realize that when you go on a show, whether it's if you were to get on the Today Show, on the news, the national news, or if it's just a podcast, I say just a podcast. Look at me. But if you don't look and sound the part, and the audience can tell you did not put effort into being there, they won't trust your service no matter what you say. So it will directly impact your performance on that show. So do the little things that are going to get you credible and make the audience want to take that next step with you. It's often overlooked, but I can't tell you how powerful and how important that one little piece is.
Well, and if you think about it this way, Brandon, people are coming on a show, like I'm on your show, and I wouldn't go to a business meeting, ill prepared, ill dressed, poorly turned out. It's an insult to you if I turn up ill prepared, but also it's a waste of everybody's time. So, but I think most people are aware of the need, but haven't known where to find it. So the course is available on Kajabi, and they can find the details at jimajames.com. There's a link there to the podcast guest blueprint, because I really want to make that my mission, is to help people to share what they have to offer and use podcasting as the medium to do that.
I love it. I'm on board. Definitely go check that out, please, and incorporate podcasting into your marketing and branding strategy if you haven't already. And if you have, make ssure you're doing it the right way. So Jim, thank you so much for being here. This has been a phenomenal episode. And for the listener, usually we keep these pretty short unless the conversation's really, really juicy. So I think that that says it all. But I do want to end the episode. I love to end the episodes with a question, and not from me. It's a question from you, actually. We believe that powerful questions get powerful answers. And for the listener, we've talked about so many different things. I just want to know, what is that one powerful question that they should be asking themselves based on this conversation to help them get their brand to the next level, get their company to the next level, their success, their reach, whatever that is. What's that question you have for them that they can ask themselves?
I heard a very good quote the other day by Jim Cathcart, and he raised something that I think was very powerful, and that was to ask yourself, if you were the person that you want to become, how would you address the work you're going to do today? So think about the person that you aspire to be. If you were that person, how would you do the work that you need to do today?
These questions keep getting better. I'll tell you what, if you're listening to this and you just listen to the last minute of every episode, I think you would 10x your business over the course of the year. Jim, thank you so much for the question. That's a powerful question. And thank you so much for being here. You were a great guest.
Thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate coming on the Harmonious at Lunch podcast. Thank you so much.
For those of you watching and listening, wherever you are, make sure you subscribe. We love putting these episodes out every single day of the week for you. So we want to make sure you get notified, you can watch them and help grow your business one little step at a time. We'll see you on tomorrow's episode of Harmonious.